Hey guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril, and today we are taking a trip over to Harad and showing you how to paint the men of Haradrim, the Haradrim Warriors that answered the call of Sauron in the Lord of the Rings and came fighting to Pelennor Fields astride Mumak and horse alike, striking fear into the heart of the free peoples of Middle-earth. These models are a great chance to use some really fun colours, some really nice vibrant purples, golds and reds, in a number of different combinations across your entire army to really create a really lovely, unique army on the tabletop. As always, our model was first mould line cleaned and trimmed of any flash. The model was then affixed to the slaughter base using some plastic glue. We then covered the base in fine modelling sand, and once that was dry, we undercoated the whole thing with Citadel Chaos Black Spray. We really hope you guys enjoyed today's tutorial. It's really fun to get some Haradrim on the channel, and we're really looking forward to branching out into some more of the Haradrim and Easterling models later on in the future. Something Mumak one day. But until then, we hope you enjoy, and without further delay, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. We're going to start off with a mixture of Bugman's Glow and Ungor flesh and base coating the hands and then the exposed areas of facial detail on the model. Now we're going to use Retributor armour and pick out any of the gold armour on the model. Now these gold areas can vary from Haradrim to Haradrim, so take your time to make sure you're getting all the gold areas that need to be painted with this base coat. Now we're going to use a base coat of Nagaroth Night, toned down a little bit with Abaddon Black, and base coat the vast majority of the cloth on the Haradrim model. Now the purple and red cloth on these Haradrim models can be chopped and changed across your entire army to create a really unique feel to each Haradrim warrior. For the purpose of this model, however, we're base coating the trousers, the head wrapping, and the sleeves with this base coat mix. Now we're going to use a base coat of Mephiston Red mixed with a little bit of Rhinoxide and base coat any remaining frontward facing cloth with this base coat mix. Being careful not to bleed over onto the purple or gold areas. Finally, we're going to use a mix of Abaddon Black with a small amount of Dark Reaper mixed in just to create that off black look we want, and base coat the entire cloak down the back of the model, around the shoulders as well as the boots. Now we're going to apply a wash to all the skin areas with Reikland Flesh Shade, thinned down with a little bit of Lamia Medium. Once the wash is dry, we're going to layer over the flesh again with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Ungor flesh, leaving the Reikland Flesh Shade showing in the most distinct recesses. Once you're happy with how your interim layers are looking, we're going to apply a highlight now with pure Ungor flesh. You can build up the progression of highlights in more stages with models which have a lot more facial detail and more exposed flesh. With this Haradrim, however, we're having quite a dialed back approach to the flesh. Now we're going to paint in the recesses of the eyes with Abaddon Black, followed by a couple of small dots of Pallid Witch flesh either side, just to finish off the look for the eyes. Now we're going to tone down all the gold armour now by applying a fairly liberal wash of Agrak Thurshade. We're not thinning it down too much, as we really want to tone down the bright vibrancy of the Retributor armour with this wash at this stage. Now, using a mix of Retributor armour and Canoptech alloy, we're going to apply a highlight to all the areas of gold which we've just toned down, focusing this on the very edge ridges of all the metalwork and detailing across all the panelling. Now we're going to apply extreme edge highlight with Canoptech alloy just to the most extreme edges and highest ridges of all the metalwork on the model. Now we're going to apply a very thin down glaze of Drutry Violet to all the metalwork, being very careful here not to let this pool and undo any of the good work we've done getting the armour to this stage. Finally, we're going to apply a pinpoint dot highlight with a mixture of Canoptech alloy with a little bit of pallid witch flesh mixed in, just to accentuate the highest points of reflection across all the gold armour. Now we're going to pick out all the gems using a 3-stage paint method. First we're going to pick out the gems with a base coat of Armour blue. Then, using a very thin brush, we're going to apply a slight reflective surface to the upper curve of all the gems with Barahov blue. And finally applying some pinpoint dot highlights of pure white scar just for the added pinprick of reflection and light bouncing off the glass. Once you're happy with how this looks, apply some Citadel Art Coat or some other gloss varnish to the gems. We're going to apply a pre-washed layer now by adding some Phoenix and Purple to the previous Nagaroth Night Abaddon Black mix, and apply this to all the purple cloth, leaving the previous base coat mix showing in the deepest recesses, ready for the next wash stage. Once you're happy with how this looks, we're going to apply a slightly thinned down wash of Drutry Violet to all the purple areas now. We're going to try and target this as much as we can into the recesses we left bare with the previous base coat mix, to really push that sense of definition between the darker and lighter folds of cloth on this model. Now we're going to apply a layer once the wash is dry with pure Phoenix and Purple, doing our best to leave as much definition from the wash and the previous base coat layer showing in the deepest recesses across all the purple cloth. There are some really nice well-defined folds in quite a lot of the Haradrim fabric, so working out where this layer stage needs to go shouldn't be too taxing, just being as precise as we can around any of the face wrappings and the headscarf as well, as this is where a lot of the material bunches and can be quite complicated and daunting. Now we're going to start layering up by adding small amounts of Cacophony Purple to the Phoenix and Purple layer mix from the previous stage. At each layer stage, focus on pushing the definition of your highlights closer and further towards the edges and raised areas of material to really push the transition between the darker and lighter areas of cloth material. By the time you finish with this stage, your mix should contain no more than 50% Cacophony Purple to Phoenix and Purple. Once you're happy with how your previous layer stages look, for the final highlight stage now we're going to add a small amount of Fulgrim Pink to the previous Phoenix and Purple Cacophony Purple mix, and apply this as an extreme edge highlight just to the most upper folds and raised areas of all the cloth on the model. Now we're going to use Carrotbird Crimson and apply this as a wash to the red cloth just to shade it down. Now we're going to add some Wazdakka Red to the previous Mephiston and Rhinox Hide base mix and apply this as a layer once the wash is dry, just to the upper folds of all of the red, leaving the wash showing in the deepest recesses, much like we did with the purple cloth. Now, using pure Wazdakka Red, we're going to apply this as another layer just before we get to the highlights, keeping this layer application a little bit tighter, a little bit thinner, and a bit more focused on the more pronounced folds of material. Now we're going to start applying highlights to the red cloth by adding some Evil Sun Scarlet to the Wazdakka, creating an approximate 50-50 split, and just applying this again as our first highlight before the final stage. Finally, we're going to add a small amount of Fire Dragon Bright to the previous Wazdakka and Evil Suns mix and apply this as a very fine edge highlight across all the red cloth. We're going to apply a slightly targeted shade now to all the black cloth areas on the model with Nuln Oil. Now we're going to slowly start adding in Fenrisian Grey to the previous Abaddon Black and Dark Reaper mix and apply these as layers once the wash is dry, leaving the wash showing in the deepest recesses on the cloth and in the boots. We're adding Fenrisian Grey here as it will complement the tone of the Dark Reaper we used for the original base coat mix really nicely and lift the tone to a more natural look once we get through to the final highlighting stages. Keep adding Fenrisian Grey in as many applications as you wish until we get to the final highlighting stage, but by the time you finish your layering stages, your mix should contain no more than 50% Fenrisian Grey, so we want to avoid this becoming too blue and looking too unnatural before we get to the final highlight stage. For the final highlight stage now, we're going to add in some Administratum Grey to the previous mix and focus this on the absolute edges of all the cloth areas as well as the most pronounced folds in all the material, just to create that apex contrast where the light will be hitting off the most pronounced folds of all the cloth on his back. Finally, for a bit of extra detail, we applied some weathering powder from Forge World to the base of the cloak, just to best reflect the area of Harad this warrior has hailed from. If you don't have any of these weathering powders though, you can apply the same look with a very light XV88 dry brush just along the edges of the cloak. We're going to use Steel Legion Drab now and very carefully pick out both the bow and the quiver on the Haradrim's back. Now, using Talon Sand, we're going to very carefully and with a good point to your brush create the wood grain effect across the bow, as well as framing and highlighting the quiver. Now, using a mix of Dryad Bark and Abaddon Black, we're going to base coat all the straps and all the leathers across the Haradrim Warrior. This includes any of the straps around his wrists, the quiver, around his front, and the arrows on his back as well. Now we're going to start adding some Baneblade Brown to the mix and apply an interim layer stage to the more detailed areas of leather strapping on the model. Finally, for the final edge highlight stage, we're going to increase the amount of Baneblade Brown to an approximate 50-50 split with the previous base mix, and apply this as an edge highlight to all the straps, all the leathers, and to the arrows on the back of the model as well. Once you're happy with how these look, you can now apply a very light glaze of Seraphim Sepia to all the leathers, all the straps, the bow and the quiver, just to tie all the layers and highlights together. Using a mix of Rakarth Flesh and Screaming Skull, we're going to base coat the strappings on the shins, as well as the wrapping around the bow, and picking out the fletchings on the arrows in the quiver as well. Now, adding some Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to create some definition across these areas by applying a layer, leaving the previous mixture showing in the deepest recesses between all the gaps in the strappings on the shins and the bow, as well as defining the fletchings on the arrow with some dot highlights up and down the length. Finally, increasing the amount of Pallid Witch Flesh in the mix for the final edge highlight across all of these areas. First, we painted the base of our Haradrim with slightly watered down Steel Legion drab to fill in between the gaps in the sand. Then we applied a very thorough dry brush over the top with Talon sand once this was dry, and finally a very light dusting of Pallid Witch Flesh over the top of that once we were done as well. The base was decorated with some scorched grass to best reflect the desert area of Harad that this warrior comes from, and finally the rim of the base was painted with a solid line of Dryad Bark. And there we have it, our brave Haradrim warrior, ready to answer Sauron's call on foot, astride horse or Mumak alike, in service of his Dark Lord and the forces of evil.